when General Hooker is surprised, General Hooker is about 6:15 or thereabouts on the 2nd, is lounging on the porch of the Chancellorsville Inn, talking to some of his staff officers. Suddenly they can hear firing beginning to the west of them, and it's coming closer and closer. Finally, Hooker says to two of his staffers, "Go out in the road and see what you can see coming from the west." And as they go out on the road, they can see coming toward them the Flying Dutchman of the 11th Corps. Each of them looking like John, even with all of them having with that same expression in their eyes that Lee Harvey Oswald has as Jack Rudy pulls the trigger. It is a rout and a stampede. So he's going to send a few cavalry to set up a screen to the east of the Chancellor's Inn to try and stop these panic-stricken men. And he turns to two of his commanders, General Barry, who he knows well. Barry normally would be with General Sickles at Hazel Grove, but right now he's in the area of the Chancellor House, and he tells General Barry, "Get your men out there and take a position perpendicular to the Orange Turnpike, at right angles to it, and get their tails throwing up breastworks. Issue as many axes as you can, as many shovels as you can, and start moving up earth here that is going to be parallel to the Confederate line of advance." So what we're going to do now, we're going to walk along the Union line. Now naturally when they're throwing up those breastworks, they're cutting the brush and the timber in front of them, maybe for 30 or 40 yards, to create a killing zone across which the Union will advance, of which the Confederates will advance. Now they'll hear the shooting, they'll hear the fire of the cannon, but they don't know that Jackson has been mortally wounded on his reconnaissance, nor do they know that A.P. Hill has been disabled, nor do they know that Jeb Stuart is in command, but they know their enemy out in front, and they know about 7 in the morning the enemy is getting closer, as General Pender from Tarboro, North Carolina, a West Point graduate, is advancing his brigade of 4 or 5 North Carolina regiments, with his most right regiment anchored on the Orange Courthouse Turnpike, and his men extending for 400 yards to the north. And on his left is going to be Edward Thomas's Georgians, and they're going to come up in front of this Confederate defense line. Now we're going to be in the 13th North Carolina, because we're going to capture a real Union general, General Hayes, in the fighting here. Hayes belongs to the 2nd Corps. The 2nd Corps, of course, is commanded by General Couch, and he has been rushed up to support Barry. I've already told you about Barry. Barry is going to cross over to see how things are going south of the Orange Turnpike. We are Revere's brigade, most of us from New York City. These trenches at that time would hit me about my armpits. In front of us would be a ditch. That ditch at that time would be maybe 5 feet across and 4 feet deep. The trees in front of us would be felled as an abattis. And we're going to be pretty damn glad that Paul Revere withdrew his men. That means we're going to cross the breastworks and that ditch with minimal casualties. Revere's commanding officers, such as Dan Sickles, such as General Hooker, and General Carr, who succeeds Berry, will point out Revere. If Revere had stood his ground and not marched his men out of action, had them pulled back to near the Wilderness Inn, the Chancellorsville Inn, this would not have happened. Because you look for scapegoats, because you don't want to be the man that made the blunder that are going to lost you the battle. All right, we will continue. It is now after 8 o'clock. Jackson wants to jump-start his advance. He has told Powell Hill to bring forward your division. Only 2 of Powell Hill's men are up. The brigade commanded by Little Jim Lane, a Virginian, a graduate of VMI, commands the old Branch Brigade. Branch having made the supreme sacrifice for the Confederacy at Antietam. So he's going to position his brigade. So right now we are standing. So the 18th Virginia is going to be just on the other side of the Brook Road. And before it reaches the Plank Road, which is Highway 3, is going to be the right flank of the 18th North Carolina. You want to be in it, because you're going to be armed with a smoothbore musket.
I'm wearing blue, though.
Well, then on your left is going to be easy to remember the 28th North Carolina. Behind them is the 50th Virginia of Heath's division. Now south of where you see that traffic moving are going to be easy to remember, are going to be the 17th North Carolina. Is going to be the 37th North Carolina, and on their right is going to be the 7th North Carolina. Out in front of them, probably 100 yards to 200 yards, and we're in the woods and it's getting dark, will be the largest regiment in Lane's brigade, the 46th North Carolina. Just south of the Plank Road and the Turnpike consolidated are going to be 3 cannons of Stuart's horse artillery. Out in front of us, 400 yards, is a new line that Hooker is cobbling together. North of the mountain road are going to be 3 regiments of the Excelsior Brigade. South of it is going to be Nippy's Brigade of the 12th Corps, the 2 Maryland regiments, the 5th Connecticut, and the 46th Pennsylvania. Having sent this up, Jackson decides to go forward to reconnoiter. He and A.P. Hill have been meeting down near the Plank Road. down near the Van Wert house. And let us walk over here. On the mountain road. The Park Service almost destroyed where Jackson is mortally wounded. And that's the alignment of the mountain road. See the mountain road on your map? The road over there where you have the traffic is a plank road. Now Jackson wants to get the attack going again. There's considerable excitement when those dumb horse artillerists open fire. Those are those 3 guns over where you have the thing, you have the number, where you have number 7. Number 7. You have 3 guns, and for some dumb reason they open fire. And it's going to bring a storm of artillery from Union guns. So that's going to have Jackson, being the pre-Presbyterian he is, stands there conversing as a storm of shells come in. Hill and his staff are hugging Mother Earth. They're not believing in predestination. Now Jackson decides he and Hill are going to part. Jackson, accompanied by 8 people, nine altogether, and we're going to emulate them as we ride forward to reconnoiter. Hill, who is going to be at point number 2. Counting he, there are 10 people riding forward on the turnpike to reconnoiter. Jackson is out in front of them. Guiding Jackson is David Kyle, not David Ward. He's familiar with this area. He had lived here. He knows where the Bullock Road is. He had been here because he'd been sent with a message from Stuart for Jackson. And none of Jackson's men really know the road network. And he asked David Kyle, you know the area? David Kyle says, I know it like the palm of my hand. So when they start down this road here, the mountain road, which runs generally parallel to the turnpike, Kyle and Jackson will be riding out in front. And behind them, being 9 men, behind them, riding with Jackson, will be Chief Signal Officer Wilburn, Jackson and Kyle. They have the lead, and behind them are since there are 9 men, are the other 6 men riding 2 abreast. And they ride out this road just like we're riding. We're out there where we have reached the skirmish line. Suddenly Sergeant Cowan, commanding the rightmost skirmishers in the 33rd North Carolina, opened fire. And the skirmish line is going to fire as it moves from right to left. Union skirmishers out in front are going to fire back. Kyle puts his hand up, talks to Jackson, and they're going to turn their horses around. So that means when they start back this way, Kyle will be on Jackson's left, Jackson is in the middle, and Wilburn on his right. And the second 2 pair of men will be Morrison. There are 3 pairs of men behind Jackson riding their horses. Over on that road, lagging behind them where we hear the heavy traffic, is A.P. Hill riding forward. Riding with him on his left is Palmer, his chief of staff, and on his right is Keith Boswell, the chief engineer of Jackson's Corps. And behind them, men are paired up, 2 apiece. Now as we're riding back this way, the skirmish firing is going on, and 1/3 of their men armed with smooth bore muskets. Now as a skirmish, so there's been Union cavalry out earlier. And so everybody in the Confederate Army is worried about Union cavalry. And they hear these horsemen approaching. Now Jackson and the 8 men with him, Jackson had not told the colonel of the 18th North Carolina he's out here. He'd gone out without telling anybody. Nor had Hill. And suddenly they hear him. Who in the hell is out there? And someone is going to yell, friends, like hell it's friends. And they're going to open fire. At that moment, Jackson is turning his horse. Whether the horse is scared by the blast of the Union small arms fire or not, Traveler turns in this way, and there's some heavy branches here, and Jackson is going to be badly cut up in the face. He will have thrown up his hand like this, evidently to probably push the branches away, or in his characteristic gesture is to push on. And one bullet is going to hit him in his gloved hand about in the gap between the thumb and the finger, and your finger that you give the person the finger when he passes you. The ball will lodge behind the skin. So that bullet will subside, and it's going to be a smooth bore musket. 2 other slugs will hit him. One you don't know in what order. One 1.5 inches below the hypercondyle of the humerus. The other right below the elbow, about where I got shot. Only this one, instead of ranging up like it does on me, ranges down on Jackson and emerges near his wrist. Sorrel is panicked, but Jackson has dropped his reins. He's shot in the right hand and the left arm. Wilburn will grab him, fortunately. We'll turn around. Wilburn is riding on the right side of Jackson now, because Wilburn has no strength in his left arm from an earlier wound, and he'll get his arm around Jackson's waist. Morrison, Jackson's brother-in-law, comes up, and they will assist Jackson off his horse. They will then carry Jackson over here into this area here. Let's go over there. Sorrel will escape and fall into Union hands temporarily. So we're now in a group. Only 3 people are hit. So it seems that Jackson is cursed. Of the 8 men, the 9 people with Jackson will, 1 man will be killed and 1 wounded. Jackson will be wounded, but with Hill's group, they're going to kill 3 men with Hill, kill the horses of most of them. So Hill will come over here, and he will cradle Jackson's head in his lap as they give some first aid to Jackson. Mainly being first more interested in wounds that are not very difficult. Wounds, deep cuts, where he's bleeding in the face. They will then open fire again with artillery. They'll crouch down and they decide they've got to get Jackson out of here. So they will get 4 men to put Jackson on a stretcher, and they'll start carrying him back in this way. And they put tourniquets on Jackson's left arm. And as they do, one of the guys is going to trip over a stub, and Jackson's going to take a terrible moan as the man falls, and the horse, and he hits the ground. Now, since we got to be going, we'll go by and point out where the monument is.
Let's do that tomorrow.
You remember Jackson was wounded about 20 yards from where I'm standing, where you have that slight rise. As you remember, they had led his horse over here. And here they help him dismount. And Traveler will temporarily disappear. He'll become a Union prisoner for several days. So this is where they'll tell A.P. Hill, Powell Hill. Now Powell Hill's party had been fired into. Remember, Jackson, 1 of 9. So in Jackson's party, there were 8 people besides himself. The most important people beside himself being David Kyle, because he's the one that knows the area. So in Jackson's group, there's one other man killed. There's one person killed because Jackson is mortally wounded, Cunliffe, a messenger, and another man, a messenger, wounded. In Hill's party, which is going to be very close to where the monument for Jackson wounding is, Hill's party, consisting of 10 people, counting himself as fired into, in which 3 of them will be KIAs. 3 of them will be prisoners, and 2 wounded. So as I say, Hill hugs the ground for a few moments, gets up, and then rushes to the aid of Major William Palmer, his chief of staff, leaving the body of Keith Boswell, were taken 2 in the brain to his side. And he's helping, trying to disentangle Palmer, because Palmer's horse is dead and has fallen on him. And Palmer, in the fall of his horse, is dislocated his shoulder. When Hill learns that Jackson is wounded, he'll come over here and he'll cradle Jackson's head in his lap. That's where we left him, as they put tourniquets on Jackson's left arm, and it has to be high because the arm is shattered 2 inches below the joint, and on his right wrist, and clean up the blood from the lacerations on his face. Then they're going to get a stretcher, and the 4 men taking it are going to start taking Jackson off. One of them is going to fall on a stop, and that Jackson will be dropped the first time. When they leave here, the tourniquets have Jackson's bleeding under control. And the bleeding, to the people who know anything about medicine, shows the damage fortunately, to veins, not arteries, because it's not spurting. Then they will patch him up, they'll get him up, but they say he lets a terrible groan out of himself when he's dropped, because one of the stretcher bearer that falls is the one on the left side of his head. So that means that Jackson falls out on his left side with a terrible moan. Then this time they will get him up again, and the men are going to be carrying the stretcher on their shoulders. I say if you were on the right, the stretcher you'd be holding it like this, with the stretcher up here. The other guy on the left would be here, and the 2 would be back where you are. This time they come under fire, and the man on your left, not you, panics and drops the stretcher, but this time he falls a long way. And the moan is much louder, and the blood is pretty worse. So Jackson is lucky to live to get to the field hospital, because when Hunter McGuire sees him about 2 hours later, he despairs of his life because of loss of blood. All right, now the years pass, and our young Presbyterian divine, and in front of them is Berry's division of the 3rd Corps. Berry doesn't know it, but he's about ready to be killed, as you remember. They belong to Berry's division, is the division that General Hooker had commanded up and through the Battle of the 7 Days. So and also through the Battle of 2nd Manassas. So this is his old division. He has a high opinion of it. He's very close to General Hiram Berry, who has been a Maine sea captain, been a Maine farmer, and had joined the Army. At this moment, he has about 5 minutes to live. These are the people who Jackson was going out to reconnoiter. Remember, Jackson was riding forward to reconnoiter the enemy line to his front. Now, Jackson would be much closer to the road than we are. So our mission, if we're in Pender's brigade, joined by Edward Thomas on our left, is to break the Union line immediately to our front. Right now, we would be in open ground, because the Confederates have cut down all the timber here to construct the breastworks of. That means how close we are to them. And then within the next, probably the next 100 yards, we're going to be entering the enemy breastworks. And that's where we're going to stop at our next time for a little talk about what's happening here. A little bit more so you can hear me. It's now 1887. James Power Smith, this young Presbyterian divine, is now a Presbyterian preacher with a fairly large congregation, and he decides to mark significant places important to Jackson the soldier. He's not yet into putting up those granite marks. So in 1877, after having talked, Hill, of course, is dead. A.P. Hill will die in battle on the 22nd, on the 2nd day of April. Having talked to other members, he remembers where Hill had told him he was shot. But Hill wasn't with Jackson. So Smith, convinced that Jackson was wounded, on the Plank Road, where Hill is. In 1887, they will take this boulder, and it will be positioned here to mark the site of Jackson's wounding. We are approximately 70 yards, because he was wounded where I showed you yesterday. Now they get big money. So Smith has been thinking it over. He has received 3 wounds. He is hit by a smoothbore musket projectiles from that fire buck and ball. As we're going to be standing there, he's going to be turning sorrel to the left. So this side is going to be facing toward the 18th North Carolina, which is about 70 yards off. We know about a third of the men in the 18th North Carolina are armed with smoothbore muskets. And as Jackson is turning his horse, he has a chance of either thrusting his right hand forward to brush aside the limbs of the trees, or else he also had a motion that he gave when he was ordering men to advance. He rode this way. So he's going to be hit in the palm of the hand with a buckshot, with a smoothbore musket ball, near where the right thumb attaches to the finger when you're giving the guy the bird. The ball will lodge, so Mrs. Jackson will have that ball. It's going to lodge behind the skin here. It's going to break 2 bones in the right hand. At the same time, he is struck almost simultaneously by 2 more balls. One is going to hit him 2 inches below the socket, where the humerus goes into, just below that swollen part of the humerus, which is known as the hypercondyle region. And it shatters his arm, left arm in this area. The other buckshot, they never recover that one. They have his rain slicker that shows a bullet hole there. Then the other bullet is going to strike him just below the left elbow and emerge just above the left wrist. Does not shatter any bones. It passes between the ulna and the radius and emerges in this area. We'll go into his other difficulties, but those are the wounds we're going to treat. I will discuss there how he's evacuated. So he's evacuated to the 2nd Corps Hospital in charge is the Chief Surgeon of the 2nd Corps, Hunter McGuire, who's the future head of AMA, has a statue on the Capitol grounds at Richmond. He's going to examine Jackson, and it's obvious that he's lost use of his left arm, so he's going to amputate Jackson's left arm. He's just going to split his right hand and saves the ball, which he's going to give to Mrs. Jackson. When his decision is made to amputate, he'll inform Jackson he's going to amputate his left arm at the shoulder, and Jackson will say, "You're the doctor, I will live with your decision." So they will give him chloroform. To bite the bullet, to bite down on a mini ball, bite down on something hard, is generally something they did in the Revolution. By the time of the Civil War, chloroform is used in the field. And almost all amputations and major operations are done with chloroform. They use ether, but they use ether only in hospitals. They do not use it in a field hospital because of the danger ether is explosive. So Dr. McGuire will remove his left arm, about just below the hypercondyle. That's where the humerus swells out from the shaft to engage. That will give him some use if he uses, but not much, with a prothesis. The operation is successful. Jackson will not be completely rendered unconscious because he wants to be conscious or have a feeling if he dies, so he'll know when he meets the Lord. The operation is a success. He'll be bandaged up, given a stimulus, and he'll be apparently, as a good day on the third, a good night on the third, and the morning of the fourth. Since the Union Raiders are returning, they're afraid they'll swoop down on the Union Hospital and capture Jackson, and McGuire is certain that Jackson will recover. So when they evacuate him to Guinea Station, he'll go in an ambulance accompanied by Hunter McGuire and several other doctors. Now, Beverly Tucker Lacey's brother, J. Horace Lacey, owns this house. Beverly Tucker is a divine, Presbyterian divine, and is on Jackson's staff. He's also probably the father, which is not good for a Presbyterian divine, to be a father of several of the widow Tapp's daughters. So he decides, normally they bury the limbs that they amputate because they're amputating large numbers, and usually they simply throw them aside and bury them in a pit, which if somebody digs up later, they're going to find lots of amputated arms and legs. But he decides Jackson's arm is more valuable. So Beverly Tucker Lacey will ride over here with Jackson's arm, puts it in a box, and he's going to bury it in the Elwood family cemetery. So that's where we're going now, over to where he buries Jackson's arm. Family cemetery. Now, the original owners of this family are the Joneses. J. Horace Lacey's wife is a Jones, and when she dies, he will marry her 16-year-old niece. Keeps everything in the family. So it's probably best to walk down the little pathway here. 18 graves in the cemetery. Hopefully 8 known graves. 8 is the Jones family cemetery. They're the original owners of Elwood. All right, he brings it over here. Beverly Tucker Lacey, and digs a grave and places a wooden box that contains Jackson's arm from this part. It has the flesh, so it's buried. Now, James Power Smith, this Presbyterian divine that is on Jackson's staff, who will become a Presbyterian minister, will mark a number of sites with these rough-cut granite boulder stones like we saw over the meeting place. And he will, along in the 1890s, position this stone here to mark where Jackson's arm is buried. As you can see, they know there are 18 bodies here. Now there's going to be bodies here, but there are no markers. So in 1921, the most famous Marine of that day is Smedley Butler. known as Gimlet, Old Gimlet Eye. He is a double Medal of Honor recipient, and he's a commander at Quantico. In 1921, the cutting back of our military is far more drastic after World War I than it was after World War II. The Navy is under, the Marine Corps is under the Secretary of the Navy. So Butler wants to get a high profile for the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, as Harry Truman will say, has a propaganda machine better than Joe Stalin's and Adolf Hitler's. Truman, being an army man, does not like the Marines. And it dates back to World War I, when the Marines get a lot more publicity than the Army. And John J. Pershing has no use for the Marine Corps. So Butler wants to get public attention to the Marine Corps to get a fair share of the Navy's appropriations, because the Marine Corps at that time was slated in personnel matters to have 1/5 of the number of men that are in the United States Navy. So he begins reenactments, and they're going to reenact battles. Chancellorsville is 1921. They also know about Billy Mitchell, the Marines do, because they have an Air Force. And Billy Mitchell had used the Army Air Force to humiliate the Navy with a series of tests off Cape Hatteras, in which he used Army bombers to sink captured German battleships. Of course, without firing back, they're anchored, they're easy to hit. So Smedley Butler invites the President of the United States down to see the reenactment, which is also going to have several battleships outlined in whitewash down on those flats there, in which the Marines or Air Force are going to bomb. Granted, there are no airplanes in World War II, but you want the President down here. Think of the Navy seething when the President of the United States is down here. It's in the last days of September and the early days of October. So Smedley Butler is over here and sees this stone. And he wonders if Jackson's arm is really there. He was well familiar with Thomas Jonathan Jackson, familiar with the story, but is it BS that his arm is here? Now, if you're a general officer, you've got a number of enlisted men. So along about the 3rd or the 4th of October, Butler comes over here with a detachment of Marines from the 1st Naval Landing Force, stationed at Quantico. He's going to tell them, boys, let's dig here, on the assumption that James Power Smith had correctly marked the interment site. They're going to dig down about 5 or 4 feet. They're going to find a rotten box. And the rotten box is the humerus of a man shattered up through this area here, and the lower arm bones, the tibia and the radius and the ulna, and the fingers bones. So he has found Jackson's arm. So he gets a good copper metal box, puts the arm back in, the remains of the arm back in the box, and is going to bury it here. Now, what is here? It was here. It is now in curatorial storage at the Chancellorsville Visitor Center. And one day they're having a fundraiser out here, and knowing I'm a Marine, all Marines are blood brothers. They're all green bloods. So they give me the bronze plaque that says on such and such a day, I think it's October 3rd, 1921, men of the 1st Special Landing Force, United States Marine Corps, commanded by Brigadier General Smedley Butler, disinterred and verified that this is the site of Jackson's burial of Jackson's arm. It's engraved in a bronze plaque. So I have it out here. And I have a big crowd like this, hopefully big spenders. And for a few moments, I take the brass plaque. You can still see the cement on the back of the brass plaque. And I sit here, and everybody gets a photographic opportunity of having it in place. I don't think they've ever done that again.
That was in 1921?
But no, this is 1921. This is, I wasn't even on the earth in 21. I don't come on the earth till 23. So that's the story of the burial and its disinterment and the verification that yes, Thomas Jonathan Jackson's arm is buried here. Jackson's body itself, plus its arm, is buried in 2 sites. First, it was sent to Lexington, Virginia, and buried in the plot of his first wife, Eleanor Junkin Jackson, along with her stillborn child that died at that time. Of course, Mary Ann Morrison Jackson lives a lot longer. And of course, she's probably wondering when Gabriel broke. The Union troops have pulled back and they hold Chancellorsville. And there you have the division commanded by Hancock the Superb. The crisis of the battle has reached. We've delayed the Confederates, the Union, as long as we've come. Worse, our commanding officer has been badly injured. He, of course, is going to be injured over the Chancellor's house. And you can see the enemy is closing in. Now, if we can seize that crossroads there, we can cut off a large part of the Union Army. So it's incumbent by us, the men in black, to hold as long as possible. So what we're going to do when we leave here, we're going up to that parking area so we don't have to walk in the woods. You'll recognize that parking area because that's where our bus parked yesterday morning. And then we'll walk down to the Chancellor House and talk about what has happened to General Hooker. And I think I have a person already volunteered. Now he's a rather handsome fellow. The ladies will like him anyway because he doesn't wear a beard. Hooker will come up here momentarily to check on Barry. As I said this morning, Hooker will see him, his old friend, his comrade in arms. And he's going to shed a few tears, order his men to hold fast, and go back to the Chancellor House where he has his headquarters. Any questions?